And I believe we are streaming, so welcome back to another live stream here with Gaston Shutters. Today we're going to be talking about two cameras that I've been shooting a lot with. One of them is the Sony FX3 and the other one is the Sony FX6. Yes, there's a lot to talk about these cameras. Now, one of the things that I can tell you, because I decided to do this video because a lot of you guys have been commenting on my prior YouTube videos, also hitting me on social media. And a lot of you guys want to know which one is the best camera for the money. And the answer is a little bit more complicated than just, picking one camera, because there are a lot of factors that are going to come to play when choosing a camera. Now, the first thing is that both cameras, share almost the same sensor. We have the 12.1 megapixel sensor, which it translates to at about 10 point something usable megapixels, something like that. And both cameras are going to have the same image quality. Both cameras are going to have S-Log 3. Both cameras are fairly small, as you can see, this one being a boxy cinema camera design, and this one being the smallest one that I've seen from Sony and probably from other camera manufacturers, with the amount of features that you're going to find in this camera. But obviously, there are a lot of things that are going to be very different. And like I mentioned before, there are going to be a lot of features that you are going to find in the Sony FX6 that you won't find in the Sony FX3. Now, in a real world, I like to say that both cameras complement each other very well. But I know that a lot of you guys may want to select only one of these cameras. So in this video, let's talk about that. So we're going to wait for a couple of you guys to join us. And as always, let me know where you're watching me from. Good evening, good morning, depending, where you're watching this from, because a lot of you guys watch me from Asia, from India, and other places in the world where, we're like 12 hours apart or even more. So what's happening? So yeah, this one has been a question that a lot of people want to know, because all the YouTube videos that are out there, they are very, very technical. And a lot of the times, guys, like myself, content creators that just want to pick up a camera just to get work done. A lot of the times you get tangled with all those concepts and, overwhelming amount of features and spew that, a lot of the time us, reviewers, YouTubers like to put out there. But in my opinion, sometimes it's good to keep things simple, bare minimum, straightforward, because in the end, when you're shooting, it's all about the composition. It's all about what you have in front of the lens. And to be honest with you, there are so many things about all the equipment that I own that, to be honest with you, I don't know all the ins and outs, but I just know that it works. And that's all that matters, a lot of the time. So yes, let me know where you're watching this episode from. And if you have a particular question regarding these cameras, make sure to type in right there in the comment, and in just a minute I'll be answering all the questions. All right, so what I want to do is I want to start with the Sony FX6, because this one was actually in reality the first camera that I got for cinema. It's my second camera, my second cinema camera, but my first one from Sony. And the reason why I went with this camera is because I loved the specs from the Sony FX9. But to be honest with you, the FX9, I always found it to be like a bulky camera. And even though it's not the biggest camera out there, I just found that I just didn't want to deal with big cameras. And to each his own, but when the Sony FX6 was announced, and I realized that almost all the features of the FX9 were packed into this small body, I knew that I was going to get this camera. But before that, I was actually already embarked in pre-ordering the C70, which is another camera that I do use a lot and I do love, because I use it with my Canon cinema glass. And I also, can use Canon cinema glass in this camera, believe it or not, and I've done a job like that. But again, I have a lot of, as you can see there, E-mount glass. So to me, getting a Sony camera makes a lot of sense. Now, one of the main reasons why I got this camera, believe it or not, is because I tried it. And when I played with the ND filters, the variable ND filter, that to me was a deal maker. A lot of times when I shoot, I have to carry a lot of ND filters. I'm going to show you my little Tupperware full of ND filters. Okay, so these are circular ND filters, and they're right over here. I also have right over there, I don't know if you see that square, my NDs right here for my matte box. But you know, when I want to go light, I just go with circular variable ND filters, and everything is falling apart right now. But if I can actually minimize the gear, to me is always a plus. Now when I shoot, I don't like to log a lot of gear, but what happened is that I end up actually logging a lot of gear. And you know, anything that I can do, anything that the camera can provide me to minimize that, to me it's always going to be a plus, especially because I travel a lot, you know, a lot. Now with COVID-19, not so much, but that's one of the reasons why every time I pick up my gear, you know, I try to select something that's going to help me minimize, you know, the amount of things that I have to carry with me. So look at the body of this camera, and it is small, and it is also very light. And you know, you don't want a super light cinema camera, but when you're packing, you know, you kind of can appreciate the weight being, you know, minimal. Now this camera is obviously heavier than the Sony FX3. But you know, once you put a lens, once you start rigging up the camera, you put the rails, you know, you put the clamps, put the lens, the whole 9 yard. Yes, it is, you know, a little bit heavier, and that's actually a plus because this camera doesn't feature any type of image stabilization. We're gonna talk about that in just a moment. So guys, let me know where you guys are watching this from. Canada, India, United States, just drop them down here in the comments. All right, so ND filters was what it sold me with the system, but as soon as I started filming with this camera, I really, you know, understood what a lot of people are raving about the FX9 and also the FX6. This camera features incredible amount of technology, you know, in such a small body. Now, the fact that I can use it with other Sony cameras is also a plus because, you know, I also shoot with, you know, my still photography with Sony cameras, and you're going to be able to, you know, mix and match that footage. The other reason why, you know, I got this camera shooting with S-Log3 in 10-bit 4:2 up to 120 frames per second, it's just amazing, you know. And topping it off, that you are going to have all this cinema functionalities is going to make the experience, you know, completely different than shooting with a, you know, still camera that has S-Log2 or S-Log3. Now, you are going to realize that when you start working with a cinema camera and you really start utilizing all the buttons that the camera has, it's going to make your life a lot easier. You know, like for example, to change from SNQ to standard mode, to say 24 frames per second, it's only a push of a button right here. And yes, you can configure that on a still body, but in this camera, you can configure many functions and basically not even having to go to the menu. Now, a lot of the times, you know, going to the menu is not a big deal, but when you are shooting and you are on a, you know, tight schedule, you know, being able to access your functions right away is actually very beneficial. And, you know, how many times, you know, you actually don't remember where things are in the menu. So that's what I do. The most useful functionalities that I use more often, I map them to one of the buttons or dials. Now, there's another thing here in this camera that you won't find in any of the other still cameras, and not even on the Sony a7S III or the Sony FX3. And it is that this camera can shoot what is called Cine EI. It stands for exposure indexing. So basically, when you set the camera to that, you basically are going to be working with your native ISOs. And this camera, the native ISO starts at 800 in S-Log3, and then you have, it's not actually clearly a secondary ISO, but a higher ISO with very low nodes. And that one is going to be at 12,800. So with Cine EI, basically what you're going to be doing is you're going to be moving the exposure index, you know, up or down, you know. And there are three levers right here on the side of the camera. Let me show you. That is for the white balance, and this one is for the indexes. So you have high, medium, and low. So basically, you can actually move the midline of your exposure up or down. Now, it's a little bit complicated how it works, but it's actually really easy to shoot with it. So I'm gonna actually link to a video from Untitled Chapter. He actually explains that really, really good. And it is something that's going to make your life a lot easier, especially because of the variable ND filter. So just to break it down to you, what I do when I shoot is I decide which native ISO I'm going to be shooting with. And then I decide if I'm going to be dropping my exposure index, you know, by 1 stop or 2 stop, or just shooting at the minimum ISO. So if I shoot at the minimum ISO, I'm sorry, if the maximum index is going to be my minimum ISO, then I can drop it 2 stops by simply, you know, playing with these two options that I have right here. So I'll be dropping it from 800 as my maximum ISO, then 16, and then 3200. And to me, that made life so easy, because the only thing that I have to worry about is, you know, dialing my aperture and then dialing my ND filter. Now, if you want to be extra lazy, you could also set up the ND filters to work as an auto ND filter variable, meaning that the camera is going to vary the amount of ND filter, the amount of neutral density, as your exposure is changing. And the difference between any other cinema camera, like for example the C70 that I have right here that has up to 10 stops, but they drop in 2 stops increments, is the fact that this one is gradual. So it's very, very granular and fine. So a lot of the times when you actually go from a super lit area to an area that has a little bit less light, you won't notice the transition in your video, or it's very, you know, passable, as you know, you don't have to edit it. Now, with a Canon C70, you know, if I'm shooting something and all of a sudden, you know, I'm flipping around to, you know, something else, you know, in broad daylight, well, I would have to edit that part, because once I change my exposure, it's gonna drop by 2 stops, and I'm either gonna be overexposed or underexposed 80% of the times. You know, it's very rare when you are gonna nail it right in the middle. So what's up, Govin G? I won the FX6, he says. Give me 1 second right here. My wife is asking me where I'm at. I'm actually recording a video. Actually, there you go. Yeah, because we gotta go to bed early today. Tomorrow we have a very, very busy day. So that's one of the things. Now, the next thing that this camera has is that it has a bigger screen. And a lot of the times, you know, if you have a Sony a7S3 and you just want to go bare bones, well, that screen sometimes is not going to cut it for most situations, especially if you're going to be pulling focus manually, which is something that you are going to want to do with this type of cameras, especially, you know, if you're in a controlled environment, if you're shooting still, you know, if you're shooting products, for example, which is something that I do a lot. So, you know, nailing manual focus is going to be very important. And while this monitor right here is not the biggest monitor in Earth, it is a lot bigger than the monitor, for example, than the Sony a7S3. Now, if you think that this video is a little bit all over the place, don't worry about it. I'm actually planning a pre-recorded version of this live for you guys with a lot of B-roll and the whole 9 yards, but I just wanted to, you know, get this video out there because a lot of you guys are asking. Now, another thing that this camera is going to shine is, you know, how modular this camera is. And this camera allows you to shoot in so many ways. So as you see right here, you have this attachment for the grip, and I have it right there in the back. But actually, let me get it for you. Okay, it's one of the greatest features, I think, of a lot of the cinema cameras that I've seen. This one is detachable. Let me just show you, and it attaches kind of like a lens right there. You put it there, locks in place, and then you can rotate. It has this little ratchet right here, or latch, that allows you to lock in different positions. Now, you don't know how useful this is, the fact that you can put the grip or disconnect the grip, but also that you can rotate it. Now, you're not going to realize how important it is until you start shooting with this grip, because this has saved my hand so many times. You know, how many times you angle the camera in a position and your wrist goes with it? Well, you know, in this case with the FX6, I can actually put the grip in a comfortable, natural position for my wrist and still have the camera aiming up if that's what I'm trying to do. So this is going to be something that you're not going to have in the C70, for example. This is something that you're not going to have in any of the other still cameras, not even in the Sony FX3. So that's very, very important. Now, this camera comes with a handle that, you know, to be honest with you, I don't use it very often. I actually much prefer to hold the camera from the grip and the lens or the body, but, you know, if you want, you can do it. And the handle has 2 XLR modules, and I believe a 3.5 as well. Now, you simply reconfigure the monitor, you put the handle, and then you can start plugging in your XLR inputs. The problem is that once you remove the handle, you have no audio in the camera. So if I have to record audio at the same time, I'll be putting the handle. But I just wish that Sony put that connector somewhere in here. And you have a headphone jack right here. I don't know why they didn't put nearby. Also a connector for a 3.5 at least, so you don't have to put the handle when you want to record audio. But it is what it is. Now, if you're going to put the handle, then you're going to be able to move this monitor. And this monitor is also modular. You're not fixed, to a position, in this monitor from the camera's manufacturer. So, which is something that you're not going to be able to reroute in any of the still cameras from Sony. And again, not even in the Sony FX3 or FX3, because this is what you get there. The monitor's there, it flips out, and that's it. So the monitor also has a lot of functions and more custom buttons. So you can call the zebras here, you can call the peaking here. You also have another custom button that you can configure for whatever. You can flip the monitor with this switch right over there. So, it's very, very versatile. Now let's talk a little bit about the dials that we are going to have in this camera, because all the dials can be configured for almost everything. So this one right here, I have it configured to the ISO. It also pushes in, so you could also use it to navigate menus. So very useful. And some of the things are going to be labeled a little bit different. Iris right here, that is your aperture. But again, everything can be remapped to whatever you want. Now, a good functionality of this camera is how they actually repurpose the buttons. If I press once this button, I am going to get what Sony called a quick menu. So I'm going to get kind of like a very reduced version of the menu, and the layout is actually completely different. But if I press the menu button for a second or two, then I go to the real menu, right? And actually that's really good, because you can have a lot of the settings that you can configure in the button in that quick menu, and you can also configure that. So let's say if you want to turn on LUTs or stuff like that, you can actually do it there, and the screen is actually touchscreen, so you can do that. So when it comes to usability and getting what you need right away, there is not a better contender than this type of cameras, and I'm sure the FX9 is even more impressive. But this is something that you're not going to find in any of the other Sony cameras, like I mentioned before. And if I am going to be doing a job that is going to be very technical, where I must stick to that exposure, I must call my zebras right away, call my peaking right away, whatever the case may be that I need to access right away, because I just want to get the video as perfect as possible. This is the camera that I'll be using. Now, the other reason is that this camera, is going to take, a little bit more of care. This is not a camera that you're gonna, just turn on and go. I mean, it takes a little bit more time to get things right here. But once again, once you get used to with this camera, you're gonna be able to achieve things in no time. I'm still actually learning, because every day I discover something new, and I just can't believe the amount of options that there are in this camera. I've been shooting with this camera for a couple of months now, and I still haven't found discovered the entire camera yet. That's what I meant. Now, another thing that's very important for me in a camera is to have record buttons in as many places as possible. And this is something that a lot of the times with still cameras, you have one or you can assign another one, but because this camera is so modular, I may not want to have the grip, and the grip actually has a record button as well. But guess what? I have another record button right over there. And I use the record button a lot because when you are on a tripod, you're moving the camera, you're grabbing the camera from the body. It feels a lot easier to press something on the side than to hunt for a button at the top or so on. Now, let's talk about white balance, because this is the best implementation of white balance that I've seen yet. To nail white balance, all you have to do is push one button, aim it to your gray car, your white car, or whatever percentage of white or gray you're trying to white balance with. And all you're gonna do is press this button right there. Boom, white balance set, you press it, the camera calculates it in a split of a second. That's it, you set the white balance. So that's awesome. And especially for when the light is changing as well. If, I don't know, it happened to me that I was shooting something with natural light and artificial light. We're shooting some products, and I just wanted to nail the white balance, because I didn't want to have different color in my video. So I changed white balance twice. And the best thing is that you can actually record the white balance in these levers right here. So you have, the presets A and B. So that's awesome. So once you say, let's say you're too white balanced, all you have to do is recall them by flickering this lever up or down. So that is actually, very, very convenient. So if you ask me why would you choose, a camera like this one versus a still body, the answer is going to be usability and getting what you need right away. That's basically it. Because when it comes to image quality, the FX3 and the Sony a7 III, they are gonna come very, very close, if not basically the same. So the main difference is gonna be that, guys. Now, let's talk a little bit about the Sony FX3, and maybe we go back to the Sony FX6 in just a moment, but let's talk about the Sony FX3. Why I said that I wasn't gonna get this camera and I got it. Well, I did a video explaining that. But one of the reasons why is because I thought that the Sony a7 III was exactly the same thing, and it is in essence, but there are a lot of reasons why I choose this camera now over the Sony a7 III, and this is going to apply differently to the type of shooter that you are. Now, with the Sony a7 III, I have to rig the camera, and like I mentioned before, I prefer to go bare bones, especially when traveling, and we do a lot of that, and move a lot from one location to the other. And this camera has built-in mounting options on the camera, on the side, on the top, on the other side, on the bottom. So you can actually start adding stuff to this camera without the need of a cage or having to put a cage. And to be honest with you, I like my cameras to look as clean as possible. But yeah, that's one of the reasons why I love shooting with this camera, because if I want, I can put the handle that comes included with the camera. I don't have it right here. But this camera also brings an XLR module built in the handle, and it connects via the hot shoe mount. So that means that you're not going to have wires dangling around. So that is something that it's not going to happen with the Sony a7 III. If you actually connect, stuff, you're going to need a cage and stuff like that. However, with the Sony a7 III, you still, can get the XLR module that I'm using right now, and and still get audio from that, from that module. But when you do the math and you add the cost of the XLR module, the cost of the cage, the cost of a handle, the Sony a7 III actually end up being more expensive. And I think that the Sony a7 III, it is going to be probably a better option than the Sony FX3 if you really need an EVF. But, a lot of the times when I'm at a job or when I'm shooting at the studio, I'm going to have an external monitor because I want to gauge my focus, I want to gauge my exposure, my colors, and everything. So I don't really rely on a EVF, even though the EVF of the Sony a7 III is actually really good. So another reason why you may want to get a Sony a7 III is if you do more photography than photos, or if you're planning to shoot some photos, in your video shoot. Now, this camera does shoot photography, but the whole experience in this camera is actually arranged for video. So, a lot of the things are a little bit more cumbersome. So for example, right here, they have switched this joystick at the top. I don't find it, as intuitive right away as, the joystick on the back of the camera. And when you're shooting photo, you're going to be moving that focusing point, very often. So, I think it's a little bit better having it here, and you're probably going to be using the EVF more. But anyway, let's talk about the Sony FX3 because that's what we're here for. So, like I mentioned before, portability is going to be one of the reasons why this camera, may appeal to some people. The fact that you can connect stuff on the camera. And the other very important factor is that the moment you turn on the camera and you start recording, you are going to see, sorry, my eyes is itching. You are going to see tally lights everywhere. Now, I cannot explain to you how many times I thought I was recording and I wasn't recording, and you even have it, this little red rectangle on the screen. So once you're recording, you are going to know that you're recording no matter if you're in front of the camera, on the back of the camera, from the top. So, it's awesome. And it's those little details that, in my opinion, help you get confidence, when you're doing a job. Also, the body feels very, very nice in the hand, and it's not super light. You know, I thought that this body was gonna be a little bit lighter, but it feels really good in the hand. You know, it's very clean, very modular, you know, very easy to rig up and fly in a gimbal. You know, this body probably will be better for smaller gimbals, to be honest with you, than the Sony A7S III, even though there's not a lot of difference. But a lot of the times, you know, you get that interference from the EBF with a back motor, depending what type of gimbal, you know, you're using. This camera also is going to have a flip out screen, so, you know, it's going to be a great option if you're trying to get a camera for YouTube videos / professional work. You know, this camera is going to get the job done. Of course, the Sony A7S III is going to do exactly the same thing. And when it comes to port, you can actually go and watch my other video, but you actually have all the ports that you would expect in the Sony A7S III as well. Now, what is different from the Sony FX3 that we have in the Sony FX6 and we don't have here? Well, to be honest with you, I'm gonna sum it up to a couple of words, and it's a lot of things are missing from this camera, just like they are missing from the Sony A7S III. Now, one thing I wish Sony had done is that they would have, you know, included ND filters of some sort of. But you don't have ND filters in this camera. This is the reason why every time I shoot, I have my variable ND filter right here from Polar Pro, and kind of like get the same effect as the variable ND filter. This one is not gonna be able to be automated like the one on the FX6, but you know, I get the job done anyway, so I don't find this being a real problem. The problem is going to be if you're going to be changing a lot of lenses, but if that's going to be the case, that's when I'm going to be bringing the Sony FX3. Now, this is the reason why I say that both cameras, you know, can actually complement really good, or the Sony A7S III. But I choose to shoot more with this camera because I just love the way it feels in the hand. I just, you know, love the way, you know, the button arrangement. And one thing that you're going to have more here than the Sony A7S III is going to be the amount of buttons to configure. You have more buttons than the Sony A7S III at the top. Let me show right there. You have buttons on the side of the camera. And like I told you before, you know, I love to have, sorry about that, guys. I love to have, you know, several record options in the camera. And this one is one that I, you know, reach out more often than the one on the top. And also in the back of the camera, you know, you have, you know, different options right there. And if you can actually read what it says right there, you know, the whole experience is actually designed more for, you know, movies than it is for photography. This is the reason why I say that if you are planning to shoot pictures, you know, at 12 megapixel, then just go with the Sony A7S III because you're going to have, you know, a much closer experience from other Sony cameras. You know, Sony did change things around in this camera, even though some of the things on the back, you know, are almost untouched. What else we have here now that we don't have in the Sony FX6? Well, we have a very important one for a lot of people, and it is that we have IBIS and active image stabilization. Now, the Sony FX6, a camera that's much more expensive, I believe it goes for around $6,000 or $6,500, doesn't have any type of image stabilization, nor you have the digital image stabilization that, you know, sometimes I wish I had some sort of you know, system of image stabilization, because most of the lenses that I'm being using don't have image stabilization. You know, especially when I use the Canon Cinema Glass. Well, I mean, it doesn't have image stabilization. But again, that is something that you can actually compensate, because Sony is the only company that offers post image stabilization with their own proprietary software called Catalyst Browse. Now, both cameras are going to be able to do exactly the same thing. So, to be honest with you, Catalyst Browse has worked so good for me that I can see this taking over image stabilization in the future, because it just does, you know, a really, really great job. You know, if I know that I'm going to be needing post image stabilization, what I do is I just shoot a little bit wider, you know, just pick my lens just to be a little bit wider so I can recompose and crop a little bit more. And there is very, very unnoticeable loss of resolution, if any. And, you know, the camera does a great, great job, especially when you're shooting things that are not moving too fast, you know, like product photography, videography, and you know, slow camera movements. Now, if you're going to be running with a camera Catalyst browse is not going to do a good job, and I tried it, and you're going to get a lot of blurring going on when you try to stabilize the camera, because imagine, you know, you're basically wiping the camera, and that's what you're recording, you know, in your frame. So a way to combat that, if you know that you need post-image stabilization and you're going to be in a very active situation, what I recommend you do is crank up your shutter speed at about, you know, 200, 250 if you can. And that way you're going to be able to record more frames, and therefore you're going to be able to get more sharper frames, and the camera's going to be able to do a better job. But you may lose the look of the motion blur. So it's going to be one thing or the other. But this is the reason why I mentioned that both cameras complement really well, because if I need to do more of a handheld job, and I don't require to swap lenses more often, then this is the camera that I'm going to be choosing. And if I am going to be maybe recording an interview or mounting the camera on a jib or things like that for, let's say, studio work, well, probably the Sony FX6 is going to be the better camera, because, you know, at that time probably I put a matte box or, you know, a modular ND filter system, even though this camera has the built-in ND filters. But, you know, if I need, I could do that. Whereas, you know, this camera, it's kind of like a different type of experience, in my opinion, of shooting. To be honest with you, you know, shooting with this camera is a little bit more liberating. Shooting with this camera, with the Sony FX6, is a little bit more technical. And I actually appreciate both sides of shooting, both styles of shooting, when you just go and shoot. Now, there is something really awesome in the Sony FX6 and in a lot of other cinema cameras, of course, that is actually included in the camera and on the screen, and it is the fact that you can actually, you have a waveform. And even the waveform is actually small. The Sony FX6 has a waveform, and that's pretty much what I go by. You know, once you start shooting with waveform, and, you know, the Atomos also has waveform, and I use it a lot, you can even go back to, in my opinion, histogram. I think that histogram is such a basic way of gauging exposure, but when shooting with the Sony FX3, you basically don't have another option than looking at that histogram and the little meter that the camera has, that most of the time is, you know, you can trust that much. But over here, you can perfectly see the image in the waveform, and you can't go wrong with that. You know, if you're peaking, you're gonna see it right away, and you're gonna see in what part of the image you're peaking, and then you can correct stuff. So again, you know, when it comes to a much more technical shoot, the Sony FX6 takes the win, you know, no questions asked. All right, so let me see some of the your question, guys. So yeah, let me know what do you want to know about this particular cameras. I'm not going to be hanging out too long today because I'm a little bit tired, but I would love to answer your questions, and also I would love to know where you guys are watching us from. So let's see, Cliff Totem say, Gaston Shatter, Sony is playing games with a 30p. They give you 24p and 60p in HEVC, but they remove the 30p on the S3, FX3, and A1. Why is Sony crippling the 30p in HEVC? I don't know, man. I don't know. Doesn't? I actually shoot in 24 most of the time. So let me actually see that. Let's go to the menu here. Let me see if I can show you. Shooting modes. Movie settings, boom, boom. I'll switch to 30 frames per second. And now let's go to 4K HEVC. Yeah, I don't know why. That's gonna be a question for Sony. We're gonna have Sony reps in the next episode. But anyway, probably has something to do with, I don't know, man. It could be that they don't want these cameras to kind of get too close to the much more expensive cameras. That could be something. It could be something with licensing. I don't know. But Reason Mao said the Sony FX6 does not have a 3.5mm audio cable and cannot record with stabilizer. Ha ha ha. The Sony FX8 doesn't have a 3.5mm audio cable or port. Because if I'm not mistaken, the handle actually has. Let me see. Let's actually look for the handle. Let's see the handle. Where's the handle? Here we go. Now, this is the one for. Where is it? Oh, I think I have it in my backpack. Now, since I'm here, let me show you the handle of the Sony FX3. I'm actually gonna put it. Actually, really easy. What you're gonna do, you pop it in the shoe mount, like so. Hold on a second. There you go. Pop it in the shoe mount, and then you screw it like that, and then you screw there's two screws right here, and that's it. You are all rigged up. That's it. No cage needed, no additional stuff, no wires hanging out. So in my opinion, is a very clean way of doing that. And also, you have all the options right there at a glance. You can also bypass the audio here if you're going to be using in the camera. That's another thing. You have a 3.5 right here. Right here. There you go, at the top. Oop, right there. That's a 3.5. Let me show you. Come on. There you go. 3.5 right over there. And you also have one in the body. Now, this little camera has one in the handle, one in the body. This much more expensive camera does not have one on the body, and that would be nice. But let me actually look for the handle, and here we are. And I believe I saw one in the handle. Do we have a 3.5 in the handle? We have, okay, let me show you the handle of the this one. No, you only have the XLR. Yep, only you have the XLR. And when I use this camera, obviously I use the XLR. So I thought there was one in the handle. No. That kind of sucks. That kind of sucks. See, in that sense, the Sony FX3 gives you more options when it comes to audio. Gives you way more, because you have the two XLR inputs, right there, and then you have the 3.5 that I just showed you. And if that was not enough, you also have one 3.5 right there, the red one, as you can see. So that is actually a good point. No audio recording 3.5 here, but also the XLR module is a lot smaller, so it looks actually really good. And to be honest with you, this handle is probably by far the best handle that I've seen on a cinema camera of this type. Look at that. Look at the amount of options that you have in a handle. You have a joystick. You have two buttons that you can configure. You have a whole button right there. You have a movie record. You have a dial, and if that's not enough, you have a zoom rocker right there. You also have another hot shoe mount right there if you want to mount more stuff, like, I don't know, maybe the Sony lavalier system. And also you have a built-in mic right here in the handle. You also have a mic scratch audio on the body somewhere in there. The quality is not that great, but this is something that you're not gonna find here. You know, you basically have the XR module, and then you don't have anything else. So I think that this is a missed opportunity. I think that the FX3 should have at least a movie record button on the handle, but you know, Sony didn't think that it was, you know, necessary. Now, one thing that you're gonna see here is that you also have a zoom rocker in this camera. You know, usually this is an on-off button, but right now is a zoom rocker right there, and the on-off button was rerouted to the back of the camera, as you can see, and that's it. But again, yeah, I just wish they had an on-off button right here in the handle. That would have made a lot of sense, because imagine, like, you're grabbing the camera, you're going like that, and you're grabbing it, and the movie record is right behind my hand. So I need to grab the camera like that, press record, grab it again, and at that time I'm going to be introducing shake for chisel if I am going to be shooting handheld. So they could have, you know, solved that. Hopefully they could do, you know, different handles that you can upgrade and use it for different things. All right, let me see. So they skip right over 30p. Yes. Have you tried the FX3 in 4K 60p extended recording heat test? I have not used the Sony FX3 in 60p. To be honest with you, I don't shoot a lot in 60p. Usually I either shoot on 24 and 120. That's my favorite, you know, way of shooting, because slow motion, I use it a lot for the product shoots that I do, and have not tested it. So, but I'm gonna test it, and I'm gonna get back to you on that one. Now, regarding overheating issues, good stuff. The Sony FX3, unlike the Sony A7 III, features a full-blown fan, blown fan. That makes sense. Pun intended right there. And you can see the gills right there. You know, these are the vents, and you also have some more at the bottom. So this camera will not overheat. Now, Sony claims that you can shoot up to 13.5 consecutive hours. You know, if you connect the camera to you know, an external battery, or you just power the camera directly, you'll be able to record. So you're not going to be able to overheat this camera that quick. And the Sony a7 III does overheat at some point, and I mentioned in my last video, I did get the warning one time shooting at a sushi kitchen. I got really scared because I'm like, oh my god, the camera is going to lock up on me. And that was the only camera I have at 10 bit, because then I have my Sony a7 III, and you know, I was afraid that I was gonna have to drop image quality there. But no, it just continued recording. It just gave me that warning, but it did scare me a little bit. Now, if you're going to be recording interviews, for example, you don't want that warning to pop, especially when you are recording a moment that cannot be recaptured. So once again, that's the reason why this camera have been created and they exist. You know, that's the reason why Sony have put a fan here, and this is one of the reasons why someone may actually opt for this camera versus the Sony a7 III. Peace of mind, no overheating. Obviously, there's no overheating here neither. This one has bigger fans and can take a beating all day long. So T-Page say image quality isn't even close to the Blackmagic though. Guys, I haven't shot with a Blackmagic. I used the Blackmagic before. What was that? The 4K, the Micro Four Thirds, so I can even compare it to the Pro. I did take a look at the specs of the Blackmagic camera, and to be honest with you, at the end of the day, is what, you know, I need to get the job done. Do I need a Blackmagic? I'm happy with what I have so far, you know. The image quality out of that Blackmagic is actually outstanding. And the amount of features that you get for the money is also outstanding. Now, do I think that I get an experience like the one from the Sony FX6? No. I rather have the Sony FX6 with this BP, what are these batteries? The BP 90 or something like that. This large batteries that I can put here without buying a grip. And to be honest with you, I don't like the body of the Blackmagic. You know, that body to me just doesn't appeal to me, especially the Blackmagic Pro. Now, if you want to extend the battery life, you have to buy the extender grip that makes the camera looks really funny, and it kind of like adds a weird shape and balance to the camera. I much rather go with this guys right here. Now, with this battery, that by the way, I bought it on Amazon for $50. I buy 4. I can record 6 hours with one battery, guys. Let me say that again. I can record nearly 6 hours with one battery. I'll repeat it again. Nearly 6 hours. That to me is a feature that I love it. Just pop a battery, no grip, no V-mount battery, nothing like that. That stuff. Still, I can manage to keep the cameras, you know, very small. And if I want to, you know, record for longer, I just bring 2 batteries and end the story. Now, the Sony FX3 features the same NPFZ100 batteries, and these are pretty good. You're gonna get probably like about 2 hours, 2.5, depending how you're gonna be recording with the camera. But it's not bad. And again, this camera is meant to give you the same power of the Sony FX6 in a much more reduced, you know, space. And obviously there are going to be a lot of sacrifices. One of them is going to be juice, you know, and the other ones, you know, we mentioned a few. Now, people are asking why Sony did not put image stabilization in this camera. Well, I mean, this is the bigger body and they could have. Well, the answer is that the Sony FX6 here. The answer is that the Sony FX6 has a system in front of the sensor with ND filters. And because of that, you cannot have a sensor moving around when you have that stuff. So that's what I've been told by Sony rep, and that's the reason why none of the Sony cameras actually have image stabilization, as far as I know. But one thing that they could have done here, which I don't know why didn't do it, is the digital image stabilization. And I hope that that feature, if it's possible, can come via firmware update, because to have that subtle image stabilization can help you a lot of the times. Because yes, you can do a lot of stuff in catalytic browse, right? Catalyst Browse works really good, but the workflow of Catalyst Browse is a pain in the bee. And I've done a video about that. First of all, you have to download all the videos from your media card to your computer. Then you have to open them all up in Catalyst Browse, and then manually you have to do one by one and set the ratio that you want to crop, check it out, export it. Exporting takes time. And right then you can move on to the second clip. So it's not that you can do some sort of a batch, stabilizing and boom and dump everything and and batch stabilize a bunch of clips. No, you can. You have to do one at a time. And to be honest with you, I'm very careful with the videos that I bring up to Catalyst Browse, because you could waste an entire day just trying to stabilize footage. So what I do is I do a pre-selection first, in a separate folder, and then I bring that, and then I go through the tedious job of stabilizing Catalyst Browse. That's why, like I say, I like to pick my battles now, and I think that with this 2-3 cameras with the Sony A7 III, I'm pretty much covered. If it's a job that is going to require a quick turnaround, forget Sony FX6 unless this camera is going to stand on a tripod or gimbal. But if it's going to be running and gunning, packing, moving, and being more active, this is the camera that I'm going to be bringing, especially if I don't need to change a lot of lenses. That's why you're going to see in this camera the 24-105. For outdoor shootings, this lens is going to be more than enough for most of the things that I do, and because I can just screen an ND filter right here and call it a day, and pretend that I have a variable ND filter, electronic, manually operated. So that's that. Now, what is good between both cameras is that you're going to be able to share all the E-mount glass that you have laying around. So that's a plus, and this is one of the reasons why I don't go the route of the Blackmagic, even though I have Canon glass. But I have to kind of like grow that collection, and if I want to go that direction. And all my Canon glass right now is RF, so I've been shooting, aside from the cinema glass, of course. Well, I can use that in the Blackmagic, so I take that back. But again, shooting with cinema glass is also a battle that I must pick, because obviously that glass does not have autofocus. You are going to have to pull focus manually. You're going to have to set up the focus puller module, or work with a focus puller to pull focus for you. And again, it's something that I would do if I have the time to get that technical. But if I don't, I go to the simple, simplest way and get the job done. All right, so we got people watching. So what else? Let me see. Let me read this comment. Which one should I read? No. Okay, what is taking pictures with the FX3 like? Is there a button for it? Yeah, well, I was mentioned before. So taking pictures with the FX3 is more of a pain in the butt, because you don't have the switch selector, for example, to go from movie and stills. And instead, you have a mode button. So let me actually show you. I hope the battery's not exhausted. Yeah, there you go. So you have this mode button right there. And I'm sorry, that's the menu button. The mode button right there. So you press that, and then you can actually go and choose manual for photo and take a photo. And again, this is just an example, right? Everything is different than your still camera. Everything takes you extra efforts to accomplish. So, I just don't do that. I just don't use this camera for photo. I mean, I can always bring, my Sony A7 R4 or my Sony A7 III and be done with it. Or my A7C, which is also a camera that I like to have in my backpack at all times. So it's the same as the Sony A7 III. The image quality is going to be exactly the same thing, because it's the same sensor. Now, when it comes to the way you operate the camera, yes, it's going to be a little more cumbersome. I'm not going to have an EVF, and I'm probably going to want to go like that, and there's not going to be nothing here. But you can actually gauge, framing with a screen with no problem. But like I mentioned before, if you're going to be doing photography, even if you're going to be doing photography 20% of the times that you're going to bring the camera, probably Sony A7 III is going to be that camera, especially if you want to get just one camera. Because guys, 12 megapixel with the image quality and low light performance of the sensor, I take that before I take a camera with more megapixel with crappy low light performance and noisier photos anytime, any day. You know, I've done a professional photo shoot. I actually posted a video. I shot a professional photo shoot that those photos were used for print work and for web work, and it was done completely with a Sony A7S3, and you couldn't tell the difference. Especially if you're going to be shooting catalog pictures and stuff like that. 12 megapixel is more than enough. Remember, it is 12 megapixel, but you're shooting like huge pictures, full frame. So you have plenty of bandwidth there, and of course, you also can shoot RAW. All right. What else? So is it easier to switch from C1, C2, C3 on the Sony A7S3? No, it's not easy because once again, you don't have that the mode selector here where you have the C1, C2, C3. So the way you do it right now is by memory recall, and you turn on the camera unless someone figures out a better way. I'll show you right now once again. So let me show you. So I turn on the camera, and now what I can do instead of C3, C2 is memory recall 1, memory recall 2, and memory recall 3. Now, if you do that, actually, let me go in movie mode. Boom. But as you see, I have to prompt a menu. I have to scroll where, with the Sony A7S III, I don't even have to look. I just go click, click, click. I remember the amount of clicks and you're there. So there are a lot of things in this camera that is going to make the photography selection a little more cumbersome. And even the different custom mode selection is a little bit different. Not a pain in the ass, but you won't change as much as if you will be hyper shooting. And if that's the case, again, I recommend the Sony A7S III first because, you may be taking pictures and, having different custom modes for photography, another one for slow motion, SNQ, and another one for your 24 or 30 frames per second. And you can simply click, click, and switch. Now, the Sony A7S III is going to get you there much more comfortable, where this camera, you're going to have to stop what you're doing, prompt that menu. That means that whatever you were seeing or framing is gone because now the menu comes up on the screen, and then you're going to have to find your function, accept it, and move up. So that is that. I hope that answers your question. Good night, Gaston. Looking forward to your comparison video. Yes, I am going to be putting a video together for you guys. So let me know what else you want to know. Type your questions here and let me know. What else can I say about these two cameras? I can tell you that if at some point you can afford both for a medium-sized production, I think you're going to be happy with these cameras. The image quality is great. The low light performance, I don't think that there is anything better than this. And I've actually seen the Red Komodo. I actually shot with a C70, which I own, is right there. And to be honest with you, I'm not that impressed with the low light capability of these cameras out there these days. The Red Komodo is very noisy, and but it has an incredible dynamic range and an incredible image quality. But for me, low light performance is key, especially for the type of work that I've been doing. I cover a lot of trade shows, and when I fly, covering trade shows and stuff like that, you're not always going to be under the utmost lighting conditions. So being able to shoot great and low light is a plus for me. Both cameras are going to tackle that, no problem. The A7S III once again. And Loico in Kiko said, thank you for your advice. I discovered your channel by searching info on the FX3, and it was very helpful. Thank you, man. Really appreciate it. Make sure you guys to subscribe, hit that like button right now if you haven't done so. I'm here late for you guys to provide you with this information. I really appreciate it when you guys do the click, 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 click. That helps the video to be published, and YouTube thinks that this is the video to watch. So I appreciate it there. What else? Let's talk a little bit more before we wrap this up in this camera. When it comes to dials and stuff like that, yeah, it is very reminiscent to the still cameras. This body, you have one dial in the front, one dial in the back, and this camera has something that I don't know if any other Sony camera has it, or I haven't discovered or whatever, but it's called flexible exposure mode. So basically what it does, it allows you to use your mode manual or automatic. Certain, the different parameters of the exposure triangle, meaning your aperture, your shutter speed, and your ISO. So you could actually enable those with custom buttons right away. So I could be shooting, fully manual, or I say, you know what, I just want my ISO to be manual and the rest to be automatic, or vice versa, or my aperture to, change, or so on. So you already have predefined buttons here that will allow you to do that. To long press of that button, like for example, this one that says ISO. So if I long press it, what's gonna happen, my nails, I gotta cut my nails. If I long press it, what's gonna happen is that the ISO will be automatic. But if I press it once, I will lock the ISO, meaning that I won't be able to move it with my dial. So it acts as a double, function. It locks your setting, but also can enable it as automatic or manual. That is actually awesome. That's the mode that I've been shooting. No questions asked. I never want to go back to the other one, because a lot of the times, you are like, okay, I don't want my ISO to be more than, let's say 800, and I'll lock it at 800, and boom, I go shoot. I may tweak my aperture, I may add, more light, whatever the case may be. And you have that flexibility without diving into menus, or, going and selecting different modes to go to shutter priority, or, aperture priority, or whatever, the case may be. You can actually lock or make automatic whatever you want. That's beautiful to me. I don't know if you can do that in the Sony FX6 though. Well, actually, you don't have to. Yeah, if you shoot in Cine EI, it just, yeah. So both cameras have a pretty similar way of shooting, but at the same time different, because you can also shoot in the Sony FX6. Instead of shooting with Cine EI, you can shoot what is called custom mode, and custom mode is actually not custom. It's actually the standard mode where you control shutter speed, ISO, and the whole 9 yard. Now, in this part of the video, I want to talk about the things that I don't like about the Sony FX3, because there are things that I don't like about the Sony FX3, and there are pretty much the same things that I don't like about the Sony a7S III. The first one is going to be the fact that we don't have waveforms. And I think that if those cameras are going to be aimed to cinema, you need to have better exposure tools like the histogram. They should have added waveforms to at least the Sony FX3, which is the latest camera that came after the Sony FX6. We don't have that. The other thing that I don't like, and I almost forgot, what was it that I was going to say? There was another thing that I didn't like. The ISO, no, what was I going to say? I forgot now, but there was another thing that I wasn't too happy about it. So let me see if I remember. That was one. Wow, don't you hate when you have something right here, but oh, okay. The other one is the fact that this camera should have figured out ND filter system somehow. Even if it's, dropping ND filters, but again, it's probably the same case as the Sony FX6 that doesn't have IBIS but doesn't have ND filters. Well, this one has IBIS, and I guess that's the reason why they couldn't put ND filters, but I'm sure that they are going to figure it out a way in the future to put that, because if this camera has ND filters, and even better, variable ND filters, I think the selection between this camera and the FX6 is going to be a no-brainer for a lot of content creators that shoot most of their content for the web or for their channel. This one would be a better overall buy. But, Sony knows what they're doing, and that's the reason why they are not allowing this camera, to do that stuff. Another thing that I wish this camera had is, to be honest with you, the body a little bit longer. I would have much appreciated if this body was just a tiny bit longer for the little finger issue that we all have, but it is what it is. I like the fact that it's compact. The other thing that I don't like is that the handle, it's nice and everything, but it's a little bit short. I wish it was a little bit longer up to here. It barely covers my hand, and it doesn't have a movie record button. This handle, I don't understand. They put even a switch right here to change from the audio of the XLR module. Hold on, let me show you there. To change from the XLR module audio from the camera or the body. They added that. Everything connects through the Hashi mount. Why not a move record button? That is something so simple that they could have done. And to be honest with you, I've been shooting a lot of the times with a handle, and I'm like, oh man, I wish it was there, because I may have to edit, I move the camera, and so on. But it is what it is. I'm still happy. Probably most of the time, the reason why this handle wasn't installed here is because I don't use this handle. I use an off-market handle that is much more ergonomic and longer, the way I like it. So that's it. And yes, I've been using this camera with the XR module, but I use this camera more for type of work, like I mentioned before, products, or traveling and stuff like that, where I'm not gonna need to capture audio in camera. But if I have to capture audio, I have plenty of options. So that's that. What else? I mean, it's very little to hate. I mean, this camera is just so beautiful. Now let's talk about the Sony FX6. What are the things that I wish this camera did better? And one is that at least we had, I mentioned it before, but I mentioned it again, that we have image stabilization, at least digital. The other one is that we have some sort of redundancy for audio inputs on the body, because I could actually remove the entire camera, remove the handle and remove the monitor, and this thing, becomes a little cube, and very pocketable, portable. So if I'm going to be shooting with a gimbal, chances are that I'm not going to be capturing audio, because can you imagine balance the camera with a handle? Impossible, and it would collide with the rear of the gimbal. So you could also remove this and put it on the side of the gimbal if you want, the screen. But that's one of the things, and I think that's pretty much it. I mean, this camera, in my opinion, is almost perfect. It's almost perfect. In this last part of the video, let's talk about S-Log3, because obviously if you get this camera and you shoot auto, or you shoot in, I don't know, in movie mode or whatever, I mean, you're basically wasting your money, because the utmost image quality is going to come from this camera when you shoot, at least in S-Log3 or any of the log gammas that the camera has. You're going to capture the utmost dynamic range. Now, S-Log3 is going to be the one that's going to give you, gray highlight recoveries and also gray shadow recoveries. But then there are other modes like HLG, and one of the modes that I use a lot, which is the mode that I'm filming this with, and it's the mode that I use on all my 8-bit cameras, is ITU 709. Because ITU 709 gives you the perfect skin tones, the perfect color, the perfect dynamic range too, without grading so much. By simply adding a little bit more contrast, increasing your highlights, your whites, your blacks, your exposure, you actually can capture a great image without the need to try to nail skin tones and stuff like that. So I advise to anyone that shoots really quick, really fast, that they try ITU 709. And the key is going to be, as always, exposing your white balance first properly. This is going to apply for this two camera as well. S-Log3, you are going to get the most out of exposing, nailing your white balance, dialing it perfectly before you start shooting. I hear a lot of people say, oh, you can change white balance in post. You can tweak, but you not necessarily can change it. You can tweak. Now, when you set the white balance, you are shooting and capturing in the native color of light that you intended to shoot at. And a lot of the times when you start messing around with white balance in post, you may end up with weird artifacts, or the color may look good on the skin, but it may not look somewhere else, or vice versa. So very important, nail your white balance, guys. All right, so Petia said, do you think that the FX3 will suck in dust through the fans over time? I'm no worry about that, man. And when I shoot outdoors, nothing had happened yet. I take care of my cameras. Obviously I'm not going to put the camera on the floor or anything like that. But I don't think so, I'm sure that Sony figured that out, right? And I'm sure that, with any cameras with fans, you may want to actually have them serviced, from time to time. But I'm sure that Sony have figured it out for that dust or whatever comes in not to go to the sensor, at least, because that will be catastrophic. So I haven't had any problem yet. Okay, so So Loico and Kiko say it would be awesome to have something like the EF, ND filter adapter. You know what? I thought about that. It would be nice, something that sits in between the lens and the camera mount that has, variable ND filter, and that you can, that will be actually really, really good. Now, I don't know if that's going to be possible optically, because you will be detaching the lens further away from the sensor. But when you use an adapter, that's basically what you're doing. So I guess you could do it, Yes, that would be awesome. I think that if Sony nails something like that, that will be incredible, because it's something that you could also use for photography a lot. And yeah, I see that feature being very, very useful for photography. I always said, I hope that Sony brings that variable ND filter technology to photography, to still photography. I think photographers will be thankful for life. But I'm talking about the variable one, not just, a couple of slices that drop in. Variable ND filters, I don't see color shifting with an ND filter, which is something that you have to deal a lot of the time with certain brands of ND filters, or when the neutral density goes past beyond X amount of stops, you start getting that color shifting, skin tone starting to look a little more greener and things like that. None of that stuff happens here. So whatever magic is going on is actually outstanding, guys. So, but anyway, drop your comments down below. Stay, look around for my final conclusion of these two cameras. I'm gonna do a pre-recorded version, like I mentioned before. Give the likes if you haven't done so, guys. And until then, I will see you in the next video. Hope you had enjoyed this one. Take care.